Greetings, Crocodile Army. Recently, a very religious friend of mine on Facebook was having a bad day, and she posted a status lamenting about how the world is so confusing. She just couldn't understand why all these bad things were happening, but she was going to continue to trust God to guide her through it. In reading the litany of issues that were going on in her life, it was a mixture of some fairly trivial bad luck and someone who wasn't being very nice to her at work. It occurred to me that none of what was happening seemed confusing at all to me. If I had that kind of day, I would have realized that all the pieces of bad luck were just things that could happen to anyone, and that it's hard to predict the behavior of coworkers you barely know at a retail job. When you believe that there's a grand plan, though, it's much harder to write off so easily. Everything that's random becomes full of intent. With difficulty, I resisted imparting a bit of age-old wisdom to her that would have explained her predicament simply but accurately. Some days you're the pigeon, some days you're the statue. The root of confusion is ignorance. If you don't understand how something works, it's going to be confusing. There are things in life that take a little time to understand, but you'll get it if you learn about it, and if your religion doesn't expressly forbid you from accepting it. Knowledge is often a threat to faith, and those in charge of religious organizations know this very well. The Texas School Board is trying to remove evolution from science class and inject religion for very much the same reasons that many states want to remove or greatly limit sex education to abstinence only. For evolution, it's as simple as a direct conflict between the literal Bible interpretation and science. For subjects like sex ed, though, much of the actual information isn't even contested on a scientific basis by even the most dogmatic of young earth creationist types. They still don't want this information taught in schools, though, even in grades where it would be obviously age-appropriate, strictly on religious objections. If they had their way, I think a lot of sex ed classes would be laughably incomplete. Your mommy and your daddy gave each other a special kind of hug, and 9 months later you were born. Sometimes you just have to have enough intellectual curiosity to know why there's a discrepancy between what reality definitely should be, given your presuppositions, and what reality clearly is. One of my Catholic friends was telling me that since I do not accept God as the objective moral authority, that I must necessarily just feel like I can do whatever I want to do morally. I of course pointed out that it seems like prisons should be full of snarky heathens like me in that case, but they clearly aren't. Then it occurred to me that the guy I was arguing with should have been able to figure this out for himself. If I had constructed a fantasy about a certain group of tens of millions of people that I said should inevitably lead to a certain result, and that result is clearly not happening, and in fact the opposite may be happening, I would want to understand why. So after going back and forth for a while, I asked him, "Aren't you at all curious why atheists don't ride that moral relativism slippery slope to prison more often? Could it be that our moral code is a bit more set than you think, despite not being based on God?" He didn't leave another comment, so I guess he didn't want to know the answer. He'll probably continue to use that ridiculous argument for the rest of his life. Life is certainly complicated and often difficult to predict because we can't possibly know all the forces at work in our daily lives, or in the minds of our fellow humans. Life is only truly confusing if you think your God is actually omniscient and also capable of controlling every force in your life. Then you need to figure out whether every bad day is due to not being devout enough, or your God abandoning you, some other cosmic factor that you can't discern, or a much more natural reason. The quicker you figure out that there's no supernatural force acting on your life, the less confusing your life becomes. Then it's just a matter of having the will to fill in as many gaps in understanding as possible with testable knowledge and acting on it. Life becomes much more manageable, and religious people may want to actually know things like why prisons aren't full of atheists. My religious friends are just as capable of learning new information as I am, but I can't force them to explore why their ideas don't mesh with reality.